I've read about how much activism you do for LGBTQ plus focused charities. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration and what's near and dear to your heart in that silo.
Sure. I am really passionate about teaching young kids about how to run their own business, because when I started, I came from a I have no money, like I didn't come from rich parents or anything. I had to learn through mistakes about how to be autonomous. And I think when you're going through a gender diverse experience, you need access to funds that might be life changing, life saving, from affirmation surgery to hormone support or into private therapy. I mean, my goodness, there's a waiting list in the UK for 3 months to get on a therapy through a doctor. So I can't even imagine what the private healthcare in America is. It's probably longer or costs so much more. So to me, I really want to teach young people about how to run their own businesses, how to sustain an income, because it is integral. And my goodness, like I remember when I first started, it was trying to make do with what you got. I had nothing. I had two IKEA lamps and a digicam, and I turned it into an incredible business. So for me, that's a really big thing. And I work with things like the Prince's Trust in the UK, which is an incredible charity that teaches young people about how to run their own projects and businesses and offer support. So it's more so from that angle I come at it, because I think, my God, like we've got to pay for so much stuff just to get by, and they're often, people don't want to talk about money, especially in the UK. People find it a bit crude to bring up money or to say like, oh my goodness, I need to pay for things like therapy. And to me, if I can just say, well, we all need to look after our mental well-being as best we can, but we also need to fund it. We need the money to fund it. So I want to set the example that I've run my own business. I've been self-managed almost my whole career until the last few months. So it's so important to be able to instill that in the next generation and give them the tools to do that too.
You know, and that's so interesting to me. Your brand has associated with MAC Cosmetics, and you have partnered with Viva Glam, and a £50,000 donation in association with Transgender Week of Remembrance. Are we responding to the needs in the trans community in the way we should, or any thoughts about how we're reflecting our support of the trans community?
I think that at the moment we have gone through the sort of growing pains of proving that visibility campaigns can bring so much positivity. We've done so many things for the last like 6 or 7 years. We've seen so many organizations here and in the US really show the humanity of different trans experiences. Today, I think we've got to go back to basics. We've got to bring each other from the roots. We've got to go into things like sharing because there's this big trick that we've been taught, which is there's only room for one of us at a time. And it's been awful because there's space for everyone to collaborate, and we don't need to compete for that one individualized spot. And what I want to do going forward is I want to share that we can build our own structures. We don't need to rely on being booked by other businesses to make work. We can actually do it ourselves. When we need to have support for each other, we can form our own safe spaces and our own places of support. And that is what I am inspired to do going forward, because I've just seen a lack of it. And I think at the moment, we've become almost like a political talking point, and it's like the boogeyman under the bed. It doesn't really exist, but there's a fear instilled. And I think that, okay, we've got our names out there. We've done a lot of this work. Let's now get back to community and talk about this with ourselves. So there's a lot of organizations that I'm looking into at the moment that I think are going to be really valid in the future.
Yeah, and we remind you, Jojo, Joseph Harwood's brand, the Joseph Harwood brand, first trans person to win a reality show competition, Simon Cowell competition. I want to ask you, in terms of what you just said of making your own spaces, that is, it's a breath of fresh air for my ear, because we report extensive stories on trans, but overwhelmingly they're really dark and difficult stories, because we're reporting on all of the political attacks and the laws and all of the related things, healthcare denial for the trans community. I'm curious first, for principally an American audience listening to you, are there differences in how the UK approaches the trans community versus the USA, or the same kind of anti-trans things going on in the UK that are going on here in America? Any differences?
Yeah, there are significant differences, but I'm not clued up on all the rules in each state to give like a direct comparison overall because I would sound like a fool. But in the UK, we've been seeing this anti-trans rhetoric start around 2015. They introduced social media segments on morning television. So when all the parents are packing their children off to school and fighting over Kellogg's cornflakes or whatever brand of cornflakes you might eat in the morning, they would bring on trans people to argue with a right-wing person, and it would be the only route to get on television to promote your product. So I was approached during 2015 and 16 to do a lot of the stuff that was going on, and there was documentaries, and it was all about combative debate, and that is designed to get social media traction. It's not designed to actually make people learn or humanize with you. And what we've seen is almost been like a false status of inclusion because there is no trans people on television in stream slots. There's no trans people on the reality shows that we had the highest rated views in the UK. There's no trans people that are being discussed. People, you don't talk about how expensive electricity's got in the UK. You don't talk about the cost of living crisis in the UK. All that people want to talk about is where you fit inside this argument. Now, I try and avoid into an argument with someone that I disagree with because I can get on with everyone, and I come from a family of religious folk on one side and the other side. Well, my nan was kind of like a witch, like a psychic witch. So I come from like two polarized points of view, and I can get on with both sides easily. That is the part that I want to bring forward. I mean, like, I don't think that every debate and argument is going to make someone change their mind. I think actually it's going to make people online maybe get angry as opposed to learn or humanize with you. So we've been dealing with this for a while, and they've got some really organized structures based in LGBT Alliance, which is it's a silly move. And I think that there's a generational misunderstanding of what trans is because of things like TikTok. And there's a dissemination of information across things like TikTok that the older generation can't access. So they've got this bit of a boogeyman fear complex about what trans ideology is doing to the LGBT community. But in saying that, there's also been another aspect of this, which is there's been a reduction of lesbian spaces. And I'm sure this is in America, but a lot of our lesbian bars have gone. And there's not been lesbian representation in our main gay magazines. And I think there's been a bit of friction between the lesbian community and the trans community, which is silly because we're siblings and we're fighting for the same thing. So I guess like going forwards, I think US is picking up on where the UK started probably about 7 years ago, but it's fiery at the moment and there's no representation on telly.
Yeah, that's crystal clear in terms of what you just said. It seems to me if the United States is following years before of UK's initiation, I want to take the opportunity to ask you about how it started, at least for me in the UK, initiated by J.K. Rowling. For American audience, we see and read about J.K. Rowling's observation of turf feminism so much. What are your thoughts about what the Harry Potter author and series has said, and do you peg that as the initiation of what began in 15 and 16 in the UK with J.K. Rowling and other kinds of people, or you don't?
No, she joined in. She wasn't the cause. It was starting a little bit before, and it was, to me, it was when big tech and social media got involved with all the pronoun discussion. I mean, Facebook sent a grenade into our culture with Piers Morgan when they suggested 500 pronouns instead of a fill your own box. I mean, it gave people like that 500 ways to start a debate on morning television. They just simply put fill in the box of how you most identify, how you most feel liberated as. It wouldn't have give people the content to say, I can identify as anything, I can be a penguin, which has been the sort of nonsense that's been on morning television since 2015 here. So J.K. Rowling, again, is part of the generation where she's not been part of the real world as a billionaire for several years now, and I doubt that she has access to the dissemination of information on things like TikTok, which is where young people are sharing what they're going through and we're learning from each other at rapid fire rate. There is another thing about this, which is the safeguarding of children that's pinged a lot of ears up. And I think when people bring the two of those things together, that's how they convince people to be a little bit more anti-trans, because there are organizations going to schools and teaching sexual education earlier than we've ever experienced in the UK. And that's something that's been tied in with the trans liberation movement. So it's a very complicated thing to dissect because she's a huge platform, and she's misunderstood a lot of what's going on, and a lot of these different elements have been conflated together. I mean, we've just seen this incident in New Zealand and Australia when there's a lady called Posey Parker, who is again one of these people that's been putting up adult human female is a woman billboards around Manchester and so on. I mean, like when you listen to people like that, they talk with such like articulacy, and it's like simple terms, and it's really convincing. But then when you break down what they're actually saying, it's something quite different. And it's saying that we now need to be scared of trans people, and the only way to combat that is to bring people into the forefront and humanize who we are. So I think J.K. Rowling has definitely been inflammatory, but I think she's cottoned onto it from a lot of the stuff that was going on just before.
Other people.
Yeah.
Jojo, you're very impressive. Business owner, you've carved out your own space in this conversation. You've advocated other trans people to do the same thing. Don't wait. Do it yourself, both in terms of safe spaces and how you develop your business acumen. In terms of what the trans community is watching in the United States, unprecedented number of laws, more than 400 aimed at principally the trans community at states across the country, mostly conservative GOP states. The laws that we watch also means sports bans in terms of how the trans community participates in sports. And the most egregious of all is healthcare. Your thoughts about what we're watching in this, I'm not a huge fan of culture war vocabularies, but for the sake of expediency, what do you think about this culture war kind of thing that's happening to the trans community?
I think it's like a strategy to break apart the LGBT community into cis people that are queer and trans people. I think there's been a evidence-based argument that you could say this has been going on for a long while, and it's very scary. The sports thing, my God, if I wasn't even allowed to do sports when I was in school. I was such a terror. My goodness, I was sent to the side when I was supposed to do all the rugby and things. I was like, what do you think I'm going to do in the mud? Do you think I'm going to be playing rugby? No, not I, said the duck. So I'm a bit of I'm clueless when it comes to things like that, and I don't know what the ramifications are of competing, whether there's money prizes or God knows what. But I think at the moment it's just been like, oh my goodness, like how Labour, which is meant to be the left side of things over here, are not advocating the rights of trans people. So it's just become ridiculous. And I think that if you gaslight people into thinking there's a big fear of this type of person, and then you use that fear to maneuver what you want out of people, that's kind of what I think is going on, which is hugely frustrating for me. But I don't know. I think in America, because I'm watching it almost from a long distance angle, I'm trying to work out what's going on in the States, because I find state law so complex to understand coming from the UK. But it seems to be a bit of a boogeyman thing, and religion's been played into it a lot as a justification. I've seen a few strange clips of preachers comparing imps and things.
Yeah, that happened just last week in our state here in Florida, calling the trans community the only black GOP representative in the House in Florida, said that LGBT broadly, but trans specifically, reminded him of watching the X-Men. And imps, they're imps and demons. So
you could take that as a compliment, though, because I quite like the X-Men.
Well, and we pointed out at Queer News Tonight, the X-Men was the story of the X-Men is that they are fighting for their own rights because they're so oppressed by those that don't have super and special powers. They're not fabulous,
yes.
And so therefore they're under attack. I want to continue on the trans experience conversation about your observations. You've already mentioned it about how they commandeered Pierce Morgan, and how the political argument of pronouns take place. You're interesting. Tell us how you identify and your philosophy of pronouns.
Well, like I said earlier with the Facebook thing, they made a tremendous mistake by suggesting 500 options. I think they should have just left a blank space for you yourself to fill in. Because I think when I've heard some of the older queens in the community talk about this, they're like, we don't need an alphabet spaghetti soup. We just need like to know what you are. And it's like again, a generational thing. Like people didn't understand why there was male to female as well as M to F. But the difference between M to F and male to female is how much you're going to disclose. So it's to give people that many options gave Piers Morgan, for an example, 500 reasons to justify why it was silly. And if you just gave a blank space and said fill it in yourself, it wouldn't have happened. I don't care what people call me because I'm not going to weaponize my identity for someone that doesn't like me. I'm not going to give you the ammunition to say something that could to damage my well-being or my mental health. I'm just going to say, call me what you fancy. As long as you're not swinging a brick at me, I don't mind what you're calling me, really. I'm not bothered. And to me, that took a long growing pain to get to that place, because I think when I was younger, I kind of went through my kind of gender discovery experience when I was about 14. So now I'm in my early 30s. It's like I've kind of put a lot of that stuff to bed. It's like I just feel like the context and the content of my character is what defines me. And as long as you're happy, I don't mind being called Joseph. I know a lot of confusion when people started to talk about, why haven't you changed your name? Why haven't you changed your name? And I was like, well, I've trademarked it now. I'm not going to change it during the whole experience. But I'm like, I don't mind. And I think that there's so much focus on these words and identity, and it should be just who you are. And I understand for young people, it's so important to be affirming to their identity. But I think once you get through that, you start realizing that all of those words start to fall apart and who you are kind of shines.
So Joseph Harwood, or Jojo, makes no difference. She, he, they, them, all good for you.
Oh, I don't care. I don't care at all. My little beautiful nieces call me Jojo, and my mother, when she's very upset with me, can call me Joseph.
Yeah, and I find that, to be honest with you, I find that very refreshing, because trying to be an advocate for community, an ally to community, sometimes I get my hand slapped that I haven't done it correctly, and I keep pointing out, well, help educate me more, because I'm still an ally, and I just want to get to it in the right respect.